How's it going, Retrogrades? This is Dave Gordon. I'm here with my brother Tim, and we have illustrious guest on with us, Father Frank Pavone. Thank you for being here, Father Frank.
Good to be with you both.
I wanted to give a brief update on my status. Obviously, I've been missing from some of the action this week, but that's because I've made my permanent exodus from the state of California. We're actually on the road right now. I'm staying with a buddy, Connor, in St. Louis right now, while en route to Michigan, where I will be starting a new job. I'll be announcing my position once I get the green light from my employer to do so. And then I am on, after training this summer in Michigan, to be finishing my PhD in Mississippi. So it's been a hectic time, but I am still alive and kicking, guys. It's just been life on the road.
Well, it's the last day of what we've called CAF Min Gov Week, theme week here on Rules for Retrogrades, and I figured that there's no one better to come and speak to the future of American minimal government than Father Frank, who really works close with Washington, being from Priest for Life, and is coupled with our president. So I would say, if President Trump wins the second term, and the original campaign issues of 2016, which had some of the more important and healthy aspects of populism, once those have been quelled, right after the second election has been won, what do you think? And you're by no means a direct representative of his, just a friend, more than I am to him. What should we expect in the second term of President Trump for the implications of minimum government?
I think we're going to see a tremendous building on what the foundation that he's already laid. And I think that's how we have to, first of all, frame this election. It's like, do we like the direction that he's taking the nation? And like he said in his inaugural, this is about you. This is about taking power away from the bureaucrats in Washington and restoring it to you. I mean, that, it summarizes something he really and truly believes in, as he says it throughout the rallies that he has held, namely that when he's under attack or when his appointees are under attack, like Brett Kavanaugh was, he reminds us they are attacking you. They are trying to invalidate your vote. The whole impeachment scam was about an attack on all of us. So we're going to see, obviously, a continuation of these themes and of building on what he has already begun. For example, the draining of the swamp, is it's a term that we as Catholics, we as Christian believers, I mean, this should really speak to us deeply, because it talks about virtue, it talks about character, it talks about, who are these people, what kind of power do they think they have, and if these are people who don't understand the very limited power that we give to people when we vote for them and put them in public office, well, then they don't deserve to be in public office. We're going to see a real, I think, not only continuation but acceleration of this effort to purify the structures of government in Washington. We're going to see a continuation, of course. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done with things like the strengthening of our borders, and I look forward to seeing the continued transformation of the courts. We have seen an amazing impact that the president has had on the courts, and we're going to see that continue. There's been 200 federal judges put in place so far, and he's been. What I love about it is that he takes it as an urgent task. He says, look, we can't have, he explains how he was surprised by all the vacancies that Barack Obama left behind when he left office. It's like, right. We can't leave any behind, any. And of course, he's got a leader there, majority leader in the Senate, who thinks exactly the same way. And with these people coming onto the courts, I mean, these are people who are going to also tame the power of government. They are going to be strongly defending the inherent rights that we have as individuals and the rights that we have as citizens. That's going to be a continued emphasis. There's no need at all, in his mind, to change anything. It's just to keep pushing on the gas pedal and making progress in that. I think that obviously, economically, we are coming through this terrible pandemic, and the thing about this is, as he has often reminded us, thank God we went into this from the vantage point of the strongest economy that we ever had, because the economic hit that we've taken has been because of a pandemic, not because of a weak economy to begin with. And what better person to build it back up again than the one who brought it to such heights before this pandemic started? So we're going to see, tremendous growth on that in that way, and he even exceeds some of the expectations that he sets for himself in that regard. So good news has been plentiful in this first term, and I'm just, for starters, I think we're just going to see more of the same kind of good news and more of the same commitment. This is not a man, of course, who's going to, change direction based on the political wins or just based on the fact that he's, he doesn't have to run a third time. He's going to stay committed to exactly what he has promised.
Father, you bring up a really good point. Well, actually, all of that's all good stuff. But as far as one of his main contributions to, I guess, the lasting fabric of American society and to the ongoing political battles, and we spoke about this last time vis-a-vis abortion, but really any constitutional conservatism is so wrapped up in the courts. One of the main things that Trump has really done excellently in his presidency is he has been a solid constitutional champion when it comes to his court nominees. And actually, I've heard calls in the last couple of days, I think by the likes of Lindsey Graham, for some of the senior judges on the benches, the senior federal judges, if they're contemplating stepping down in the next few years, this is the time to do it, because this is the time where we still have, for sure, the presidency, and I think Trump is going to win 4 more years, especially over the likes of Joe Biden, as gaffe-prone and incompetent as he is. But Trump's a great candidate anyway. I think he would prevail over anyone at this time, but especially Sleepy Joe. It's just, we have now the presidency and the Senate. So conservatives, Republicans, we have the ability to create great new judges. And so there have been calls, and I wonder what your thoughts on this are, for judges, senior judges, to step down if they're contemplating doing so in the next few years. This is the time. Why is it so important? Because the federal courts have become so politicized, right? I think that's a well-known part of American politics, is the courts are not supposed to be political, but due to especially the court packing plans of FDR, what they have become is the judiciary has become very politicized. And you saw this especially in the wake of the Roosevelt administration. These judges need to be thinking ahead. If they want to preserve the Constitution of the United States, if they want more people who aren't going to be judicial activists legislating from the bench, and they want judges to fill their seats who are truly constitutional conservatives, who are going to interpret textually the Constitution and the laws of the United States, they need to be thinking, okay, it's time for me to step down. It's time for me to strategize a little bit so I can have a successor fill my chair that is going to do my legacy honor. And that is going to have lasting political ramifications, especially in the realm of divorce, especially in the realm of abortion right now, which is, we're teetering on a razor's edge for the pro-life movement to have those resounding victories that we've spoken about. But in every other regard, too, the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, we've seen that during the coronavirus. The churches have been under attack. We've seen an attack on religious liberty. What are your thoughts on that, on these judges stepping down?
It would be a beautiful act of service, wouldn't it? That they would realize that, I can continue even beyond my time on the bench to affirm and protect the Constitution and future decisions by allowing President Trump and his colleagues in the Senate to name my replacement. That would be a very wise thing, and of course, it's a question of their own judgment in the matter. But like you say, if they're already planning on retiring, why not do it under a president and under a Senate that will choose a successor with the same philosophy? And the judicial philosophy is so crucially important. Like you say, the politicization of the courts is real, and so we have to fight on that terrain while that is in fact what's happening. And this is the interesting thing about the conservative or originalist judges, that because they have the right idea about the role of the courts, namely, you apply the Constitution and the laws to the case that is in front of you. You don't use it as an opportunity to rewrite either the laws or the Constitution. Because they buy in to that objective view of the relationship between cases, laws, and the Constitution, their decisions will tend to be a little bit more unpredictable. The folks who want to rewrite the Constitution and the law, those on the left, the Democrats and their people that they would put on the bench, it's very predictable the way that they will rule, because they couldn't care less about what the laws and the Constitution say.
Right.
They want to write their ideological position into the law and those decisions that their judges would make. And therefore, being we know the direction they go in, always pro-abortion, anti-America, anti-religious freedom, etc., we can go down the list, that's how their judges are always going to rule. They're always going to rule. So on our side, and this is where I think people have to have a sense of wisdom and patience here. Sometimes our own judges come down with decisions that make us scratch our heads and say, well, why did they say that? Why didn't they just, go in this direction? It's because they're trying not to go in any particular direction except where the Constitution and the laws already direct them to go.
You see this writ large in the criticisms of Professor Adrian Vermeule, so-called Catholics who say they want to get to a position of common good constitutionalism. Why can't we just cheat the procedural rules that true constitutionalists who are truly Catholic, like the late, great Justice Scalia, want to see us follow? Why not just skip to it and declare a kind of judicial tyranny where we declare it a Catholic republic? That's not the way, is it?
No. In fact, you mentioned Justice Scalia. I remember, as you said that just now, a time when I think it was Legatus. We had a group of men and women from Legatus, and we arranged a private audience with him. So he gave a talk, and we're sitting there in the room in which we were sitting. We could see the Capitol out the window, right? And so one of the members raised a question somewhat similar to this, a question relating to abortion. And Justice Scalia said, look, he said, as I have always said, when people, and they must, want to take action to change our public policy on abortion, he pointed out the window and he said, you got to go across the street.
Legislature. Yeah.
Congress passes the laws. Go over there, have them change the laws. He says, and then if the law comes back over to my desk to say whether it conforms with the Constitution, well, of course it does. A law that's going to protect human life, how can that not conform to the Constitution? So he said, but he was very, very aware of the the limitations of his role. And what I've always said in educating people about elections, I say, that's really the first question you have to ask a candidate. What does he or she understand about the limits of his or her power of the office that we're electing them to? That's really criteria number one before you even get into the issues. What do you think? What kind of power do you think we're giving you? And if they answer that one wrong, get them out of the way.
People,
that's
this is the main theme of Cap Min Gov Week is the division of branches, the separation of power.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, Tim, that's something that we talk about actually in the Rules for Retrogrades book on when we're delivering these political invectives and these strategies for taking back the culture. We devote significant time to saying, look, in a certain way, the conservative, the retrograde, is going to have one hand tied behind his back because he's always going to be bound by adherence to the strictures of ethics, not just in substance, but also in procedure. We're not going to be able to fight and just do anything we want to take back the culture. We have to do it according to Christian form, according to Christian procedure. So we can't just
originalism, constitutionalism. Yeah, we got to follow the rules.
You've got to follow the rules and the Decalogue, the eternal moral law also, like no lying, no cheating, no stealing to achieve our ends, which we know the left will lie, will cheat, will steal, will loot, if you look at Minneapolis right now, to achieve their ends. And they end up, so retrogrades, we have to fight not only for a good cause, but also in a good way.
That's so important. And you know what it leads me to think, too, is that one of the ways that we encourage, let's say, for example, people in the pro-life movement, encouraging them to re-elect President Trump, to re-elect a Republican Congress. What you just said brings it into relief. Let's take, for example, first of all, let me give you an example of how respectful he is of process. I am often invited to come on conference calls with various officials in the administration as they are preparing to make changes that are under the authority of the executive branch in various policies. For example, we had a call not too long ago, and it dealt with changes the administration is making on matters of when faith-based organizations like Priests for Life, for example, want to enter into some kind of contractual arrangement with the government. They were looking at all the rules and regulations that apply to that, and they said, obviously there are laws, so Congress has written into the law certain non-discrimination requirements. So, you're hiring, you're not going to discriminate based on the sex, for example, or and a number of other categories that are written into the law. But President Obama, by his executive authority, threw into these regulations mention of sexual orientation. So now, various faith organizations which hold to the divinely revealed plan of God for marriage as between one man and one woman said, well, we're not going to be discriminated against, are we? It's not going to be harder for us, is it, to contract with the government if we don't believe in gay marriage, for example. And what the president did was he took those Obama provisions out of there and said it's not going to be any more difficult for a faith-based group to engage in these contracts than it is for someone who is completely secular. But notice what he did. He only removed the things that the executive branch put in there in the first place. He didn't tamper with the law. And in the call, it was made so very clear that certain things here are under the authority of Congress. So not only are we not touching them, but if there are things that need to be changed, then obviously that has to be taken up with the Congress. But in encouraging people, look at for example, the funding or defunding of Planned Parenthood. I think that we've got a lot of folks out there among our fellow citizens who think that the defunding of Planned Parenthood is as if you were turning off one particular water faucet, one particular spigot, and it's either on or it's off. Either the government funds Planned Parenthood or it doesn't. And it's like then they say, well, Why hasn't the president stopped the funding of Planned Parenthood? He said he wanted to do that. And this is where they have to understand there are many spigots, many of them, and they're controlled by different branches of government or combinations thereof. There are certain ones that the president can, in fact, turn off. There are others that only the Congress can turn off in conjunction with the president. They'll pass a bill, and then he signs it into law. So the good news is everything that is under his executive power as president to do, to keep money away from Planned Parenthood, he has in fact done. And we saw most recently the Title X funding, right? Planned Parenthood had to drop out of the program because, of course, they're not going to stop doing abortions. But now the government's not funding them for doing abortions under Title X. And the various international things, and of course, not only reinstating but expanding the Mexico City policy. This was under his executive authority,
right?
And he did it. So people shouldn't be discouraged. Oh, well, he should have done more. He can only do what's given to him to do by the Constitution.
President Trump's heroism, his heroic presidency, should be contextualized in the following way, in the following backdrop. The globalism that's been emerging around the world and in America versus nationalism, wherein nationalism is the heroic view. Now, we just finished CAFMIN Gov Week, where we're talking mostly about the national government versus the individual state governments, and we want to return to a more robust subsidiarity where the national government is sort of the villain, right, in most of our assumptions in the conversation we've been having more theoretically 1776, 1778. So what I urge my fellow retrogrades to remember, and I'd like you to comment on this, Father Pavone, is that the national government's the good guy against the global stage. Not when we compare it to restoring powers to the three branches on the one hand and restoring power to the state legislatures on the other hand. And I'd like to see President Trump return to that after he sufficiently deworms us of the nasty globalism. Just yesterday, for instance, he pulled us out of the WHO.
Yes.
It's beautiful, it's amazing. This is what I'm talking about. His nationalism is good nationalisms against globalism because it's the more subsidiarian of the two. Next time, maybe next 4 years, I'm hoping he'll have a chance to prove his chops in terms of let's give some power back to the localities. But he hasn't had the opportunity to yet, has he?
Right. I think this is a good point. That this is a multi-phase process, and we've got this threat of globalism. I don't think enough people understand what's going on here. We were just talking a little bit about the courts, and when you see Supreme Court justices, quoting the constitutions of other countries and bringing into their decisions, what these other nations are doing or what these jurists and other. What in the world do they have to do with our Constitution in the United States?
Right.
Let's be the United States of America. And so yes, he's fending off this push to just globalism, one world government. It really doesn't matter, that we have a country. And but I think very much that in a second term he would turn attention to strengthening now the power of not just strengthening, I mean recognizing in the first place and helping people understand, the power of the states. And we are the United States. This is where, the left's push for, and I'm sure we'll hear more of it in the coming months, how they whine about the Electoral College. And they say that this is some outdated, archaic, racist structure. By no means. I mean, this is something that enables us to be the United States. And if one were to follow the logic and say, we got to abolish this electoral college because we want just, one person, one vote all across the country, and just let's do our elections that way. Well, then why do we have states to begin with then? I mean, the logic of it follows to a place where most people, even who embrace it, haven't even thought. Why does every state have 2 senators, even though they differ so much in size and in population? There's the same principle at work. But so there's a lot of education that needs to be done. And then, of course, there would be various steps that he could take executive action, I'm sure, that can strengthen and clarify the relationship here between the federal and state governments.
Yeah, yeah, and just a word on the Electoral College. If you abolish the Electoral College, you're going to have the nuts in California and New York setting national policy for us for the rest of the foreseeable future, because those are the population centers. You've got New York City with 8 million people, and you've got Los Angeles with 4.5 million people, and obviously California and New York are, California is the most populous state, New York is one of the most populous states, and you have these people with their weird urban interests, their strange urban peccadillos. They are going to be the ones setting the policy for the rest of the country. That flyover America will have no voice any longer. Father, I'd like to get you to comment, and I hope this isn't putting you on the spot too much, but can you give us a few top policy initiatives that you would like to see in President Trump's next term come to fruition?
Well, one of the things, of course, is what we were just talking about in terms of the defunding of Planned Parenthood. He is ready to sign such a law, and we need to give, at this point, we need to give him a Congress in order to do that. So that's certainly going to be at the very top of the list. And also in dealing with abortion, there is in the states, besides the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, which would protect babies from 20 weeks forward, that enjoys a lot of support. There's also a law prohibiting dismemberment abortion, and that is something that the administration can also support. I'm sure that he would support, but that hasn't gotten yet to the point where it's an administrative talking point. He talked about banning late-term abortions, and the Pain-Capable bill he's made an explicit commitment to sign. But the dismemberment legislation is another good next step. Ultimately, the goal, and he articulates this, of course, is the protection of every baby, and so that will certainly be the goal towards which he'll continue to work. It might be a good idea too to take a look at the back in President Clinton's term, there was this FACE law that was passed, and the questionable thing about it is that you can have two people sitting in front of a facility where in the same building, let's say on one floor, abortions are being committed, and on another floor, animal experimentation is happening, and two people are sitting to block the doorway peacefully, and one of them, because they want to save babies from abortion, the other one want to save animals from experimentation. Under this law that Clinton signed, the one who's trying to stop the abortions is punished more than the one trying to stop and experimentation on animals. It doesn't make any sense, and this really hasn't been a priority to look at this. But I think that the way that the president supports the freedom of people to not only hold but express and act on their views without any kind of viewpoint discrimination might make it ripe to look at something like that. Another priority that we have to look at is all of this. All of these investigations that have happened into Planned Parenthood, and of course certain cases have been referred to the Department of Justice to say, look, something's got to be done. This is a criminal enterprise. This is not a healthcare organization. It's a criminal enterprise, and the ball has started rolling on that. Processes have been initiated, but again, once we have some, as you've been describing so well, some of these other priorities taken care of, I think turning some attention to that and bringing the full weight of the Department of Justice within its defined parameters to dealing with Planned Parenthood would be a very, very important objective. Now, on other issues, I want to see the wall built, finished, and you know what? I had an idea. I even mentioned this to some people in the administration. You know what I'd like to do as a Catholic priest? Go down there and bless the wall.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be awesome?
That's great.
Because
It's a great bumper sticker. Bless the wall.
bless the wall. Because we have, in the Catholic Church, we have the Book of Blessings, and you can bless construction sites, you bless buildings, you bless homes, you bless vehicles, and all. Well, bless the wall, because it's being built for a very, very dignified purpose: the protection of our families, the protection of our communities, the protection of our nation. A wall is great. The president doesn't say that it shouldn't have a door. The wall's going to have a door. You can come in to our country, but come legally. And
I hope it's a small door.
Can I just add real fast, because I think this needs to be said for our viewers. Too many in Catholicism, too many of our, I would say, prelates have this notion, and it's an unjustifiable one, that for whatever reason, controlling immigration is inherently wrong. It's a per se evil, and they'll point to things in the Bible like the instruction to care for the immigrant. But that's not a moral absolute to care for the immigrant. All of the affirmative commandments in the Bible, like, give all that you have to the poor, take everything you have, sell it, and give it to the poor. These things must be done at our discretion, using prudence. They're not absolutely binding, whereas all of the negative commandments, thou shalt not kill, these things are absolutely binding. Thou shalt not steal. And we need to point out that Thomas Aquinas explicitly says that immigration should be regulated for the common good. And we're talking politics today, so we need to put on our political thinking caps and be like, okay, then there's a political element to immigration that must be understood before we just say, come on in, everybody who wants. The fact is, and this is why the Democrats are so pro-immigration. Democrats don't have big hearts. These are the same people that want to shred and burn alive, babies in utero. They want women to be able to have post-birth abortions. They don't have big hearts. They're not compassionate. They're evil and wily. Why they feign to care about things like immigration is because over 2/3 of immigrants come and they vote Democrat.
That's
now,
right.
if you are a Republican or a conservative and you want to see, for example, human life protected in the womb, if you want to see a return to marriage laws that reflect Christian doctrine on marriage, no more no-fault divorce, no more gay marriage, if you want to see a return to all of these conservative Christian policy initiatives, then you have a vested interest in immigration, because when immigrants come in unchecked and they have kids and their kids vote, even if they're illegal immigrants, they don't get the vote, but their children sure vote, and they vote overwhelmingly Democrat. We need to stop the flow of immigrants into our country right now, because they are having a say in our political system, and it's overwhelmingly a negative say. So until we can take them in and assimilate them to the fabric of the American society, and what we see is, 2 or 3 generations down, many immigrants start to vote more conservatively. So until we can assimilate this body of people coming into our country, we need to slow down their flood into the United States, because they're having a drastically negative effect in that they're going and voting for these liberal politicians, and that's the political element that needs to be spoken of.
Yeah, exactly. And from the Catholic element, like you say, there's a caricature out there. Catholic teaching is pro-immigration, and the Republican efforts are anti-Catholic. This is nonsense. And when we look at the Catechism, for example, it's very, very clear. Along with the teaching about the dignity of the immigrant, which we all acknowledge, is the teaching of the fact that anyone seeking to enter a country has to respect the heritage of that country and obey its laws. It's right there in black and white in the Catechism on immigration, and obey its laws. And the country has a right to protect itself and to define its boundaries. How on earth are Catholic leaders and Catholic teachers, Catholic clergy, just completely ignoring that part of the teaching. And this is not right. It's an injustice to Catholics who are trying to understand what does the church teach on this issue. And unlike the abortion issue, unlike that, the policy here is not, the policy and the principle are two different things. When it comes to the right to life, the policy is the principle. You
Amen.
can't kill babies. So there's no nuance there. There's no prudential judgment there. There's no gray area or leeway there. You don't kill babies, period. But with immigration, as I often say, there's no immigration policy in the Catholic Catechism. There's no immigration policy in the Bible. There are principles, but it's up to the legislators, it's up to the president to shape public policy. And it seems to me.
Would you run for president? I mean, maybe in 4 more years, would you?
He can. He's a priest.
Trump,
no public office.
Yeah, I think we have our next candidate. It's very tough to win following 8 years. Don't want to celebrate prematurely, but this is so important. Can we? I'd like to shift into in closing here a cultural moment.
Yeah.
You know, we've dealt with the global, we've dealt with the national. We'd like to move President Trump into a states' rights mode, and I think he wants to go there. He's been very excellent with the balance of powers, as you say, particularly the judiciary. But culturally, Father, a city near me, Los Angeles, parts of it are on fire 100 miles away. Many parts of Oakland are on fire here in my state, and San Jose, across the bay there. Obviously, we've all seen Minneapolis and Portland.
Yeah.
These people, so I don't know, it bothers me when I turn on even the likes of Fox News and they call this a protest. That is a lie. That is a lie. Retrogrades out there. This is not a protest, right? It's not even a strongly overreactive protest. It has nothing to do. Arson, vandalism, and acts of urban terrorism have nothing to do with anything that may have happened last week. I know it's an election year, but and I know President Trump comes down strongly on these people. I'd like to see that. But culturally, is it not important to distinguish, we pro-lifers, we're pro-life, but we're not a bunch of Ned Flanderses. We know how to protest without setting cars on fire.
Right.
So one, I'd like to see you respond to the difference between legitimacy of protest and illegitimacy. And then two, I'd just like to say, I know we sent you this book,
Yes.
Rules for Retrogrades. The people, this can't all be put on the president's shoulders. So first question, legitimacy, illegitimacy of protest. Secondly, culturally, Catholics out there have to get strong, they have to get tough, and they have to use some sort of playbook in the, it's not the laity, it's the equivalent of the laity clergy distinction. It's the citizenry. We have to help him out and become the change we want to see in Trump. So would you respond to those two things?
Yeah. What we're seeing is just a blatant violence and just a disregard for law and order. As the president says, when he talks about the elements on the left that fuel this kind of stuff, these people are sick. This is what it boils down to. They're sick. But the legitimacy of protest, which what we're seeing is not. As you both know, we have on our Priest for Life team Alveda King, and that is such a blessing because we're always talking about her uncle and her dad and those that crafted the civil rights movement. And boy, what an example! And the civil rights movement and the pro-life movement, what an example these have been over the decades of a kind of a protest that is rooted in and fueled by faith and prayer, that is rooted in and fueled by a recognition of the dignity of the human person, including our political enemies, and that conducts itself accordingly and works within the boundaries of the law, and also recognizes that there are times for civil disobedience. Civil also in the sense of peaceful. So, and that ties into the second part of your question. If we have the right, as we do, to legitimate protest, boil it down and say it another way, it's to make our voices heard. That comes to us and is protected for us by our laws, our Constitution, multiple court decisions, but also by the gospel. Well, you look at the scriptures, and the prophets are a great example for us here. When they say, cry out full-throated and unsparingly for what is right, for what is just, let your voice be heard in an individual and in a collective way. Organize, get together, be a person who just cannot be ignored, and that is at the heart, it seems to me, of not only what legitimate protest is. It's very Christian at its root, and it's very American. I love that. What's that decision? That Supreme Court decision, the New York Times versus Sullivan, I think was the name of it. What talks about the public discourse that has to be robust and wide open, right? Without hindrance. We've got to be able, no matter what our message is, to state it clearly and organize in such a way that it is heard and seen clearly, always under that rubric of peace, order, and respect for human dignity.
Discourse does not come at the point of a sword. You don't get to have your voice known by lighting things on fire and looting and attacking police stations.
Right.
And it undermines the legitimacy of the very point you're trying to make. If you go out and comport yourself as we see people comporting themselves, whether it's in Minneapolis or Oakland or Atlanta, and it's just a despicable thing, and it does dishonor this man's death.
It does.
Because I think the protesters, the legitimate protesters who are making their voices heard, actually have a point. This was this thing that took place, this death, this act of, I guess it's police brutality, excessive force. It was indefensible, as have been a few in the past, like Eric Garner. But that's being drowned out now, because now we have to deal with these cities that are burning. And this isn't, just for the record, and I've tweeted this out, I don't see this as a black-white issue at all. This was not a racially motivated crime, just like Ruby Ridge, where there was excessive force against white folks in Idaho, was not a racially motivated crime. I think we're beyond that at this point. There is an issue with the militarization of the police, and I think it's a serious, a critical threat to our liberty. I think there is an issue with people going into law enforcement without holding the mental reservation that this is a dangerous job, and there's no way to make it not a dangerous job without stripping people of certain rights and liberties that they have. There's no way to subdue a person in a way that's going to be respectful of their bodily autonomy, that also is not it doesn't pose somewhat of a risk to the officer. So if you're going to, you know what you could do? You could electrocute them, and that would make people not be able to fight back also, but that would be dangerous, and it would be undue and unjust. So if you're doing policing right, there's always going to be some risk of life and limb to the police officer. You should know that going into it. Don't go into this line of work if you can't tolerate this risk, and if you're going to, because all affronts to civilian liberty are done in the name of officer safety. But so I think there was a point at the beginning of this where, yes, I would have been out there protesting and said.
But the protests were all done in the name of racism. Now it's come out that there was no asphyxiation. He didn't die of asphyxiation. B, he was charged quicker than any other cop in the area has ever been charged. And that's so due process works. C, I think we all agree here, it's not an issue of race. So there is no legitimate protest. I mean, all the even legitimate protesters, if you believe there are some, are saying this is a race issue. D, perhaps we could close on this issue. Due process. With all this post-liberalism that's happening even on the right wing in America, due process is really what's dying here, isn't it? People, I said last night, this is a homicide, right? It might be lawful, it might be unlawful. This cop had something to do with this man's death, whether he proximately caused it or not, remains to be seen, right? That'll be seen in the court case. And we have a governor and a mayor of Minneapolis that have gone out and used the term murder, which has not been legally ascertained. It's It's an alleged homicide at the most at this stage, and no need for protest because the guy's been arrested, right? And no need for protest because there's zero evidence of racism anyway. So that's one thing, let that happen as it will, but there's zero connection to arson, street violence, and conversion of property on a large scale. Many of these people running out of the Nike stores with Jordan shoes, which is really their George Soros-backed remuneration, because he's busing these people into these places to be fake protesters. They say, "Hey, what about justice for George?" Right? And they say, "Who's that?" Usually in filthy language. They're like, "This is all about Jordans, man. Free Jordans." That's what it is. And it seems to be George Soros with an anti-Trump effort, or semi-early in an election year. We'll give you the final. Or David, you want to say something?
The point about due process is such an important one. We have seen the left trampling upon this in so many different ways. We mentioned earlier Justice Kavanaugh, the president himself, the way he's treated. This automatic knee-jerk, slapping the label of racism on everything, which eliminates the authentic meaning of the word and makes it harder to deal with it where it really is. But also, that whole accusatory dynamic, that willingness and readiness to accuse. Who's called the accuser? Ultimately, the devil is the accuser. We've got to be aware here of the legal dimensions of this, the moral, the psychological, and there's some deeply spiritual dimensions here. This spirit of accusation all the time, and this is a very dangerous path to be on.
Yeah. No, I agree. I don't have too much more to add to that. Just guys, I think one of the themes pervading this show has been you have to do things not just with an eye towards a good end, but in the Christian framework, ends don't justify means. So you also have to do things via ethical means. And whereas guys like Tim and I, who are very aware of the danger of too excessive of police power to liberty, because it does pose a clear and present danger to liberty if you have excessive force by the civilian police, where we might be out there, protesting and making our conservative voices known to the world when things like this happen. We can't march alongside people who are looting and rioting and doing physical violence. It's become a despicable freak show, and I'll have no part in it. Even though my heart does go out to Mr. Floyd and his family, especially as the president has tweeted this thing out. And I do see it as an unconscionable act and just absolutely inexcusable on the part of this officer who perpetrated this.
It's going to be litigated. So let's see, like you'd say about any court case. We don't know the facts. It's now coming out that the guy had drugs in his system. Who knows? Or maybe the cop. Cops aren't always the most polite to me and as a youth. So I know that on the one hand. On the other hand, he might have been whispering, "Hey, if you let me up, I'm going to kill you." We don't know. This is why we litigate facts. Here's why I wouldn't march, even with peaceful ones, because I have a view to the whole picture here. 3 weeks ago, the media, the Soros-funded media, in order to get President Trump, that's what this is all about, tried another test case. Right? Tried this Barbary case, and it didn't involve a cop at all. It involved what appears to me to be two good Americans who thought they saw a crime happening in their neighborhood, and they were sticking up for their part, sticking up for their right. And the media was pushing it, and they're pushing this lie about, jogging and things like that. And then just the more facts that slowly emerged over the next week. This guy's a criminal, right? This guy has a bad record. So they're like, no, kill it. All we're going to do, we, the Soros-funded media, to get Trump in the upcoming election is to wait for the next time that there's any kind of story. We have high crime rates in the inner cities in America. We commit violent crimes at a higher rate than anybody else. So we'll just wait for one of these. We'll cherry pick one that's a little more well fit to our facts and to our narrative, and we'll push that. And so I don't want to be a part of that. Of course, if there was excessive force, let the guilty hang, right? I mean, isn't this why justice is blind, Father Frank? Let
Exactly.
the guilty hang. Yeah, but first we have to have a trial. And people were correcting me on Twitter when I said the alleged homicide. They're like, it's not alleged, man. I'm like, no, it's alleged until we have a verdict from the judge.
Yeah, exactly. No, that well said, and we have to keep pressing these points. I don't know. Sometimes, I think that you see all these people reacting, and it's like, have they never, ever learned the meaning of the freedom they have? They haven't. They don't care about it. But when we learn the meaning of the freedom we have, then we can exercise it in a restrained but effective way.
Amen.
Beautiful. Okay, well, we'd really like to. President Trump needs to be president for 4 more years.
Yes.
Father Frank, you're the best Catholic I know of at making this the point, and we have to do our cultural part. And I would love for President Trump to say, this is the cultural way to achieve it. I mean, so does everyone who writes a book, but we have 40 rules called Rules for Retrogrades in the book form. What Catholics who are not a bunch of clueless Ned Flanderses can do to instantiate that and to mandate that this be the path for the future, at least the next 4 years, at which point we're going to have to reconfigure and say, who's a good follow-up president to run against the Democrats? I say today, on today's show, Saturday, May 30th or whatever, it's Father Frank Pavone. I want to see this happen in 4 years, Father Frank. How can I guarantee that? Anyway, we really appreciate you spending the time with us for the second time now. Caf Min Gov Week is over. Separation of powers, Sic Semper Tyrannis. We just want to see America restored to her former crypto-Catholic glory, hopefully with less crypto and more Catholic in the future. But we really appreciate your time all, and we will be coming with you more quality programming next week. Everyone subscribe. I don't say this often enough. Hit the bell, and please do see to Dave's and my Patreon. We are trying to bring you quality programming like we did 6 out of 6 days this week. And it takes serious wherewithal. This is my first week of summer as a teacher, and yet I was just in this room every day, and helping my wife edit, doing the shows. Brought you Father Sirico on Monday, Trent Horn on Tuesday, Stephanie Slade on Wednesday, Dr. Samuel Gregg on Thursday, Mr. Robert R. Riley on Friday, and now capping off the week, Father Frank Pavone on Saturday. This takes wherewithal, so people please see to our Patreon accounts if you like what you see, and definitely click like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you all.